Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Culture Clash podcast. I'm Michael.
I'm Vlad. Hello, everyone.
And today we're going to be discussing, we have a unique episode for Christmas and the end of the year. We're going to be discussing our top 5 most important events from 2024, the top 3 risks that both Vlad and I identify for 2025, and then some unique Christmas traditions that are held around the world. So with that, why don't we get started?
Let's go with the top 5 stories, the highlights of the year.
Let's do that. You want to do yours first? You want to do mine first? What are you thinking?
Let's start with yours.
Okay.
You're always a little bit more grim than I am.
That's true. That's a good idea. End on a good note by having me start. I think that's a very good idea.
Yeah.
So my 5 topics in order, in terms of their importance. Of course, not trying to be biased as an American, but the re-election of Donald Trump. I think it's a very important event. I think it has ramifications globally. I'll go into them, in a second. I think the fall of Assad in Syria, again, recent event. I think that was extremely important. Again, political earthquake, as we talked about on our, 2 episodes ago. Something, again, you're familiar with, the Russia-Ukraine war, I think, and its escalation in 2024 is something very important. So I put that at number 3. Number 4, I put the Elon Musk rocket, the reusable rocket, as one of mine, as number 4. And then finally at number 5, there's a new HIV treatment that looks like it's going to be able to prevent HIV almost in its entirety. So major medical breakthrough that's going to obviously give relief to a lot of people, possibly end the HIV epidemic. So I think I'm starting off with maybe 3 that are a little bit grim in terms of what could happen to the world, but then 2, hopefully, that end on a bit of a more positive note. So with that, any comments on my top 5 before I get going?
I was gonna say that yours don't look so grim as I expected.
Okay, wait till I get into them, and especially when I get into the risks for 2025, right. You might change your mind.
Okay.
The reasons that I think Trump and his re-election is, again, the most important event that took place in 2024 from a global perspective. Most impact I think that's going to have on the world as a single individual event is for a number of reasons. So again, I think what Trump brings to the table now, coming to office January 20th, 2025, is a prospect for peace between Russia and Ukraine. Not saying it's going to happen, and I'll get into, I think that's also one of my biggest risks for next year, but the possibility of it. So he's really prioritizing trying to make a deal between Russia and Ukraine. So again, I think whether it goes in that direction or it escalates, either way, there's going to be something tangible that comes from Trump's reelection as it relates to Russia and Ukraine. Again, Trump has said many times he's committed to a long-lasting peace in the Middle East. However, that's going to be accomplished. So again, we've been looking at war in the Middle East since October 2023. So the possibility that there's going to be some leadership taken from the U.S. side to try to make some sort of peace agreement, some sort of deal, I think, again, is welcome news, but also it can move in either direction. That'll go into one of my risks as well for next year. Another big area, I think, outside of war is tariffs. So actually trade war, so kind of related. And what's interesting about Trump since his reelection is he's threatened tariffs against almost everybody at this point. But against China in particular, he's threatened 10% tariffs across the board because of the fentanyl issue, and I think in general just trying to renegotiate, again, things like fentanyl and some other areas of disagreement. So 10% tariff on the U.S. number 4 trading partner overall. Then Trump came out surprisingly and is calling for a 25% tariff on all goods from Canada and Mexico, which are the number 3 and number 2 trading partners to the U.S. And then also, I think out of the blue a couple days ago, he was calling for tariffs against the EU if the EU didn't buy more U.S. oil and gas. So in order, that's China, the number 4 trading partner, Canada, the number 3, Mexico, number 2, EU, number 1 trading partner to the U.S. So Trump is pretty much going to trade war against everybody or threatening that, hoping to get some sort of deal out of it. So I think that in and of itself it has huge implications for what the economy is going to look next year, for what international relations will look like. Again, Trump already calling out the top 4 trading partners of the U.S. So no matter how you slice it, it's impactful, his election. Another area is is Trump calling for easing oil and gas regulations next year. So again, what that could do theoretically, add more oil and gas to the market. That would obviously be welcome, I think, for economies globally, bring inflation down a bit, things like that. But then again, he's also talked about greater enforcement on Iran and Venezuela and some of the oil and gas production that those two countries have been doing, which could move in the other direction. That could mean higher inflation. That could mean higher oil prices. And then again, what Trump has talked about is greater confrontation with China. So from my perspective, no matter how you look at it, I think the Trump reelection is extremely impactful across the board, economically, from a trade perspective, from a geopolitical perspective, Russia, Ukraine, Iran, China. It's all related. So that's why I put that at number one. Any feedback, any thoughts from you?
Couldn't agree more. This obviously is one of my highlights as well. Yeah, we'll get into this in a moment. Couldn't agree more.
Excellent. Number two, so again, this is something that we discussed recently, is the fall of Assad in Syria. So the reason I'm saying that is, again, we went over this recently on on 2 episodes ago, but the ramifications of the fall of Assad in Syria dramatically alter the risk, I think, of what people were thinking could be an all-out war in the Middle East, just again, a couple of weeks ago. So again, this severely weakened Iran in what's called the Levant region, right? So Syria, Lebanon, that region. Iran's been dramatically weakened over there. So again, I think that prevents the possibility of suddenly a wider, Israel, Lebanon, Syria war. But that being said, while the risk of maybe all-out Middle East war has gone down, I think the risk of a direct confrontation with Iran has actually gone up. So again, very impactful either way you slice it. So now that Iran is in a weaker position, doesn't have as much leverage, I think Israel and the U.S. would be less constrained in wanting to directly confront Iran should it come to that. And again, that would be over the nuclear program, things like that. So I think, again, very important and impactful no matter how you slice it. Again, I think Trump being in power raises the risk of a direct confrontation with Iran, but also, of course, the possibility of a deal. So I think, again, it's both possibilities have gone up, that either things will escalate or things will end in a deal, but status quo, I think, is the least likely outcome. So again, very important there. I think, again, it's impactful for the Syrian people themselves because they're likely to have sanctions lifted, and then hopefully, the Syrian economy can return to normal. Syrian citizens can live in a bit of a better condition, I think, when it comes to travel, when it comes to these types of things. So again, very impactful. Russia potentially is going to be losing its biggest ally in the Middle East, as we talked about 2 weeks ago, and is demonstrating that it has a weaker global position on the backs of this. And then finally, Iran, obviously, with a severely weakened position, as I talked about, causing, again, as a major ally of Russia and China, that there's a weakness to that whole alliance network. So I think, again, very impactful event, and that would be my number two. So any thoughts initially on that?
We talked about this in the previous episodes, but what do you think will happen with not with the region itself, but with Syria and its neighbors, meaning Israel and Turkey? Because I think now we can see that they both try to use the opportunity to reshape the borders, to reshape the relations with Syria. What's your thoughts on that?
It's a very good question. Again, I think it's a bit of everybody's preparing for the worst and hoping for the best, right? So I think from the Israeli perspective, obviously they've had control of the Golan Heights for a long period of time. So I think they're trying to sort of have an insurance policy in case there's more chaos in Syria, for example, or in case there's any risks that develop from their perspective to their position in the Golan Heights. So I think that's the purpose of this expansion. And then from Turkey's side, of course, I think Turkey is looking to have as great of an influence in Syria as possible, given the fact that it's on their borders, given the fact that there has been historically an issue between Turkey and then some of the Kurdish groups in Syria. So I think that's really what's going on. It's a bit of a chess game at the moment. I think also we're going to see over time what politically happens in Syria. Is Syria going to be fully unified at the end of it? Because currently there's still tensions between the rebels that came to power in Syria, the Kurdish groups in the northeast of the country. The U.S. still has troops in the country, for example. Russia still has a base. So I think there's a lot still to be played out. And my guess is everybody's trying to increase their leverage, just in preparation for whatever comes next. So that would be my view.
Okay. Okay, I think that we can clearly see that both countries, meaning Israel and Turkey, they try to get their piece of the pie, trying to solve their issues using the change in Syria. But yeah, we will see what happens.
Yeah, Russia as well, obviously, right? Russia's trying to keep the base and see if they can maintain a relationship and some sort of positive.
Exactly, yeah. Russia is being way more flexible than I could expect, honestly.
Yeah, and I'm surprised they haven't been kicked out yet either. I think that's kind of interesting that they're trying to negotiate something. So yeah, everybody's playing some version of chess in Syria right now. So my number 3 in terms of 2024 events, in terms of the most impactful and important, is the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So again, a conflict that you know quite a bit about. It has persisted and it's been escalating this year, and I think that's obviously very important and portends some challenges moving into next year. So just a very quick rundown as to what's happened in that conflict over this year. Russia's made the largest gains territorially since 2022, particularly accelerating that pace between August and December. So every month since August, they've been accelerating actually their gains on the ground. Again, for the first time in a long time. So gains we haven't seen really since the very beginning of the conflict when they took over the majority of the territory they now have. And then again, things escalated further in March when the U.S. gave long-range, what's called the ATACMS missiles to Ukraine to hit Russia. So then what we saw again, so the U.S. gave ATACMS missiles to the Ukrainians in March. Then Ukraine actually had a surprise invasion of one of the Russian regions, actually invaded Russia. The Kursk region. So the first time Russia had been invaded since World War II, since the Nazi German invasion. And that happened in, when was that exactly? In August. So again, what we saw was, again, this consistent sort of escalation of the conflict. So long-range weapons that the U.S. gave to Ukraine in March. Ukraine invades Russia in August. Then North Korea sent 12,000 troops getting involved in the fight as well. 12,000 troops to Russia in October, so bringing another party to the conflict directly, into the fight. Then the U.S. in November approved the use of ATACMS missiles into Russian territory on an unlimited basis, so being able to hit wherever they could. So obviously that raised the temperature again. Russia's response to that was to deploy what they've called their invincible, and I'm putting that in quotes only because I don't know if it is or not, but deploying their Oreshnik hypersonic missile, which the Russians have been talking a lot about. And that was again in November after the ATACMS use was allowed by the U.S. across Russian territory. And the Russians are claiming it can't be shot down. It's impossible to shoot down. Okay. So then the latest was South Korea just a couple of days ago reported North Korea is going to be sending more troops to Russia. So we just see this steady scale of escalation as we've seen really for all of 2024. And then finally, again, in the past couple of days, so, media reported that the UK and France was considering deploying troops to Ukraine to train Ukrainian forces. But again, that would be a further escalation. You'd actually have NATO countries outside of a NATO operation, but NATO countries on the ground in Ukraine. So you talk about raising the temperature and raising risks. Obviously, that's something that's, that's important. So again, a lot of events happened this year, a lot of escalation. So I think that's, again, number 3 in terms of the most important events from this year. And then finally, Vlad, I'll give you some good news. So again, it's been mainly negative. It's been mainly stressful and all that. But the Musk rocket. So again, I would say that's extremely good news. I have that at number 4 on my list. So Elon Musk and SpaceX made history this year in October for the first time catching a rocket, the rocket booster in these mechanical chopsticks. And we got to show the video so people can appreciate it, which is a necessary step to being able to fully deploy reusable rockets, which again, reusable rockets is almost like the holy grail to being able to achieve, relatively cheap, economical space travel. So you don't need to constantly throw out the rockets and do all of that. So what SpaceX has said is that these reusable rockets, once perfected, is a requirement to be able to take humans, equipment, and supplies to the moon and Mars, and obviously further beyond. A woman called Kate Tice, a systems engineer at SpaceX, called it a day for the engineering history books. So again, this was just a huge event, sort of broadly speaking. So in terms of us wanting to become a multiplanetary species, wanting to go back to the moon, wanting to go to Mars. This step had to happen, and it did happen this year. So overall, huge event. You're smiling about it. So what's your take? Anything to add on that?
I'm smiling because this is another highlight that I selected as well. But I want us to appreciate the technical miracle that they made. Like, it was not just the rocket. It was super heavy rocket. Can you imagine 120 meters in height? It's huge. It's huge. And they managed to catch it just like on a very small platform with the chopsticks in the quotes. But can you imagine the technological miracle that they made? Like, this is a huge piece of metal going to the space and going back, and they calculated it perfectly. They can manage to put it in the several square meters. This is
insane.
The precision is insane. The technological advancement is insane. And yeah, I totally agree with the quote that you made of this lady. It's the huge day for engineering. I think we will see more rockets like this, and the rockets should fly to the sky, not on the ground. So
hopefully, we can all hope for that.
Yeah.
I mean, again, that's something that I think will go down in history, and you're going to see that in history books 20 years, 30 years from now, when and if we're able to get to, back to the moon, to Mars. People remember that was one of the defining moments once you were able to. Again, that video is insane of, again, this huge building size rocket being just caught midair. Unbelievable. So again, piece of good news from 2024. And then finally, I have for my last piece of good news, something I just read about actually yesterday, but there was a huge breakthrough in the treatment against HIV. So there's a journal called Science that called the emerging data of a drug called, let me see if I get this right. Okay, I thought I was going to get it. Lenacapavir, and they're calling it the 2024 breakthrough of the year from a medical perspective. What they're saying is that this was a pivotal step towards diminishing HIV/AIDS as a global health crisis in general. So currently, you've got 1.3 million people every year getting HIV, 38.4 million people globally who have HIV. And again, the true medical miracle and the breakthrough that happened was you had two recent studies that proved that this drug was extremely effective in preventing HIV. So not curing it if you had it, but preventing it. So one of these two studies, you had 96% effectiveness. The other one, you had 100% effectiveness. So all you need to do is have an injection twice a year, and it almost completely inoculates you against getting HIV. So huge breakthrough in the potential to, again, defeat one of the major health crises of the last 40 years. So again, ending on a bit of good news. So any thoughts on that? I don't know if that came up in your list, but
I haven't heard anything about this HIV treatment. Like, did they claim it to be like the future treatment, or like how positive are they on the possibilities?
So it's a bit expensive right now. So again, it's going to be probably mostly used and mostly effective in more developed countries. And then the problem is most of the people suffering from HIV are in sub-Saharan Africa right now, where again it's a bit poorer. So in the immediate term, it's not going to necessarily solve the crisis, but again, the building blocks are there with this highly effective drug. If you can make it cheaper, or if you can make an oral tablet version or something like that, and get that proliferating globally, then obviously you can make a huge dent, and possibly similar to what they did with polio, maybe you can then vaccinate people or treat people prophylactically ahead of time to prevent them getting it. So again, huge step, which is just showing that in all the chaos that we're seeing in the, again, geopolitical tension, economic uncertainty, missiles flying around different countries, there is still a lot of positive things happening. Humanity is still pushing forward. You just don't necessarily see that in the headlines every day.
Yeah.
So with that, Vlad, what are your top five top 5 events from 2024.
We have quite some overlap, honestly, because I think we discussed quite some of the highlights in our previous episodes already. So I selected my 5, where I also have the US elections, of course. Then I also have the Elon Musk and the technological miracle, because it's something that can be compared with the first flight, first space flight, or the moon landing. Depends on like whenever it happened, or whether it happened or not. We know that the audience might have different views. I also selected the Olympic Games in Paris. Remember, we had the Olympics this year.
I remember, yeah.
Yes. Then also one of the highlights, it's mainly for for my country, for Russia, is the death of Alexei Navalny. You know,
of
you
course,
obviously know him.
That was big news, but a lot of other things happened this year.
Yes, I will tell more about this.
Please do.
And following to this, like to build up on this. In summer, also, Russia exchanged some of the prisoners and some of the oppositioners. That was a very big prisoners exchange, and these things, they're interrelated. I will get into this in a moment. And also, I selected Linkin Park Resurrection.
Oh, of course you did.
Of course
you did. Wow. Top 5 event for the globe.
Exactly. Yes, and I will explain why.
Yeah, please do. Please figure out a way to convince me and the audience of that. Okay.
I don't need to convince anybody because it's obvious. Okay.
Okay. All right, so go ahead.
Yeah, so I will not go into the details about the elections because you covered it perfectly. But the reason I selected this is it's obvious. Every time we have the US elections, it's important and it's affecting the world. But in this particular case with Trump, first of all, it was like the political drama or maybe criminal drama. Like we can debate on this. But what I think it's more important is the way he's currently shaping the office as well. Because in America, one political figure cannot change that much. However, the way he is reshaping the office, the changes he proposed and the changes that are expected from him, they will reshape the world. Because now we see that basically he invited half of the PayPal mafia into the office, which is unprecedented, I guess. Unprecedented. Yes, thank you. So this will bring changes. Then I think it's the first time the first time when they announced the increasing of the efficiency of the governmental offices with the Doge that we discussed. So I think again it's a new step for the political development. And I'm intentionally not covering all the geopolitical topics that you already covered. So I think, definitely this is one of the highlights. And as you rightly mentioned, all the analysts, I think they agree that Trump is so unpredictable that we will see the changes, but these changes can go either direction. These changes can be either for good or for bad. We don't know. But obviously, whenever you look at the analysts talking about Russian-Ukrainian conflict, there is two directions. Either he starts pushing for the deal immediately, or he will increase the stakes and then try to get the deal. Same goes for the Middle East and for other relations with other countries. Okay, so this was my first highlight. The second highlight I'd like to cover is the death of Navalny. So why is it important, and what's the story about it? So if you heard about him, you know that he was probably the most noticeable, the most famous opposition leaders in Russia, if we can call it. So he was in the political field since 2008, 2009, and he started actually as a blogger. He started with the YouTube channel. This is how he started. He started doing and he was famous for it. He was doing the loud and deep investigations about the corruption in the government, and he touched many political figures. He covered everybody from the president to the mayor of Moscow, a lot of people, and he touched a lot of people and he pissed off a lot of people. So Yeah, that's how he became famous. But the importance of his death, and the important and why I selected this as a highlight, is because basically with his death and with the following prisoners exchange that I mentioned, there is no more any even idea of the opposition in Russia anymore. He was in prison since 2022. He was sentenced to tens of years. He was already in prison since 2022, but he still was some kind of. Have you seen the Hunger Games?
Yep.
The movie. So he was kind of the Mockingjay. He was he was the symbol of the opposition. He was the symbol of the other direction. He was the symbol of anything like the symbol of the resistance. Let's put it this way. Even though he didn't have any power, he didn't have any political power, any political will, he didn't have any political program. By the time he was sentenced and by the time of his death, he didn't have any party, any political influence. But he was kind of a symbol. So what happened in 2022 first? So in 2022, he was imprisoned. And then in February of 2024, there was a news that he died in prison. Now we have a lot of conspiracy theories, whether it was he was killed, whether he was poisoned, whether he died from the sickness. Nobody knows, and I think we will know it in, I don't know, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 years. But that happened. And then in summer 2024, Russia exchanged a lot of opposition leaders, opposition figures, someone like Ilya Yashin. Have you heard about him? No. Okay, so the two most famous are Ilya Yashin and Vladimir Kara-Murza.
I know him. Yeah.
You know him?
Yeah, he lives in Germany, I guess, or lived in Germany.
Now they both are in Germany because the prison exchange happened in Germany. So basically, Russia exchanged 16 opposition leaders to eight convicted prisoners in Germany, convicted Russian prisoners in Germany. Most of them considered to be some sort of spies or special agents.
So what are you saying, that the Russians released 16 German spies?
No. So Russia released various people, opposition leaders, some foreigners that were also in prison. In exchange for 8 Russian citizens from Germany.
Okay, got it. Because Germany wanted them out of prison.
Germany kind of orchestrated this. This was international efforts to do this, and Germany was the ground where it happened.
Okay, to release Russian opposition leaders in exchange for Germany releasing
Russian spies or agents.
Yeah, okay, got it.
Okay. Yeah, so that's what they did. Why is it important? Because in this exchange there were two second main opposition leaders, Ilya Yashin and Vladimir Kara-Murza. So now, basically, they are also out of Russia, and again, with that, any sign of opposition, any sign of alternative path disappeared. So there is no more opposition in Russia. So we can say that the current government completely won this. So that's why I consider this as definitely the highlight for at least for Russian politics and for Russian audience.
Look, I think it's fair even from a global perspective because of how important Russia is as an individual country, right? So Russia's coming up in a lot of what we're discussing, whether it's the conflict in Ukraine, whether it's just geopolitics globally. So the political situation in Russia is obviously of a lot of importance. So yeah, interesting take, interesting story.
Also, just an interesting note, why this Vladimir Kara-Murza is famous, because basically he was the one who orchestrated the first sanctions against Russia. He was
Magnitsky Act, all that stuff?
Exactly. Yeah, okay. He was the author, an official author of Magnitsky Act. Exactly.
Could you explain to the audience what that was? Something about adopted children, right? And
so adopting children was the response from Russia.
Yeah.
From Russia. So basically, the story was the following: in early 2000s, there was a company operating in Russia, like a consulting company or investment company. I don't want to go into the details, but one of their lawyers, one of their legal counsels, Magnitsky, he investigated and he uncovered the huge corruption scandal. And he was imprisoned in Russia, and then again mysteriously died in the prison.
American guy or
no, he was a Russian guy.
Russian guy.
He was a Russian guy, but in response to that, for the first time in Russian-American relations, the U.S. introduced the sanctions against the certain civil servants who were considered to be involved into his imprisonment, into this corruption scandal, and everything connected to that. So that was the first time, it happened like 15 years ago, and that was the first time when the U.S. introduced sanctions, individual sanctions against Russian civil servants. In response to that, Russia introduced the legal act preventing American citizens from adopting the Russian children. So that's how it all started. So basically, and one of the authors of the first sanctions imposed to Russian civil servants was this guy Vladimir Karamurza. He was working between the UK, the US, and Russia. So he was the one consulting the American government onto this sanction package.
Wow.
That's why he was like one of the most hated oppositioners in Russia by the government, of course.
That's interesting. And again, it sounds weird at first, like what kind of retaliation or punishment is banning American citizens from adopting Russian children? It sounds completely unrelated, but it's funny because, I mean, obviously I'm American, right? And growing up in the US, there was actually a lot of people that I met, a lot of people that I knew who were actually Russian adopted children in the US. So my understanding was in the 90s, there was a lot of people who wanted to obviously leave what was then, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, leave Russia. They brought their children, or maybe again due to alcoholism or whatever, the internal instability in the country. A lot of people put up their children for adoption, and a lot of Americans ended up adopting Russian children. So again, I knew a number of them growing up. So that's interesting. Wow. that then came in. Yeah, no, like a number of them, like probably 4 or 5 I could name right now, which is
just in your circle.
Just in my circle, yeah, just where I lived. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, so with that is why I consider this as a highlight of the year, because with that two events, and I believe they're strictly interconnected, the prisoner exchange and Navalny's death, there is no more opposition in Russia. And I think we know from the history that it's impossible to do any changes from the outside of the country. So all the opposition members, and there is no more, there is no more community of opposition, I would say. So it's done. That's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Obviously, big impact on what's happening right now between Russia, Ukraine, and obviously the wider geopolitics. So yeah, interesting story.
Yeah. Then let's go to another highlight that I selected, is the Olympic Games, and I didn't select this because it's the Olympic Games and it's a huge sport event. No, I selected this for the two main reasons. First of all, the positive one. You just described the...
Are you going to say the positive one being the U.S. won the gold medal in basketball? Is that what you're going to say?
I didn't even know that.
Of course we did.
Okay, you should have at least one sport.
I think we had the most medals anyway. Sorry, I cut you off. Go on.
Okay, good one. Okay, I selected this because first, like you described the chaos happening in the world, and still, this is kind of the beacon of the light where you have the international, tournament and international collaboration in its best, where you have all the people, all the countries competing together, and like sport is here, politics is here. This is how it's supposed to be. And I really like this tradition from the ancient Greece, where no matter what's happening in the world, we have the Olympic Games as a pause. But yeah, this is a positive thing. But the negative thing is the whole ceremony around the Olympic one. And I don't want to go into the details of the whole events, of the opening and on the closure, and all the like weird things that happened during the games itself, like people got poisoned in the Seine. But anyway, but the way I think about this was the highlight of this like strong woke movement, and I think we covered it many times, the rise of the far right movement, and I think this was another drop to this. I think like when you see this major international highlight putting the woke movement on the spotlight, on the pedestal, I think this might have become another push towards the far right. I think that was that became one of the another acceleration, another reasons for the rise of the far right that we see across Europe. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, look, I totally agree. I remember, again, we don't need to go into the details of the event. I didn't watch the Olympics, to be honest. I just watched the highlights of the U.S. basketball team. And again, no surprise we won. But yeah, no surprise. But when I saw I saw it from my ex feed, where suddenly everybody was talking about this opening ceremony.
You saw it from your ex?
My ex-girlfriend said it to me. Exactly. She was like, "Did you see this?" No, my ex feed.
Okay.
Yeah. Formerly known as Twitter. I know sometimes I got to speak slowly so you understand, right? So, but yeah, look, I thought it was insane, to be honest, because again, and I think, we had this conversation a couple months ago. At some point we were talking about what happened at the Olympics and the backlash, that they found a way to somehow insult everybody.
Exactly.
Which is impressive almost, but it's like, what were you thinking? That's the thing I can't wrap my head around. This is meant to be a moment of unity, of putting aside, again, all your divisions. The world is obviously in a very chaotic time. There's a lot of wars going on. And then you want to put on this display that offended, particularly, I think it was Christians, but obviously Muslims were affected. Muslims were offended. I don't think they had anything particular in Judaism, but you offended, at the very least, the two most populous religions on the planet. And you did so in a way that anybody would have known that that's what you're going to do, by, again, making fun of the Last Supper and, inserting, LGBTQ, trans stuff into the Last Supper, I think it was, and stuff like that. So again, we don't need to go into all the details because some of it is insane. It's pretty crazy. But yeah, I just thought it was, again, in poor taste. I think the French president, again, he's very unpopular right now. He just had a pretty bad beating in the elections over the summer, Macron. He came out and immediately was a staunch defender of the opening ceremony. And I remember seeing one of his tweets, and it said, "This is France." And I was thinking at the time, I was like, okay, that's what you think. Do your people think that? And what we're seeing is that more and more people, particularly in the West, as they go in this far right direction, that includes cultural conservatism and a backlash against this woke, this woke movement that we've seen for most of the past probably 10 years. So I agree. I think it only added fuel to the fire of this sort of culture war that's happening in the West. So yeah, those are my thoughts. I thought it was insane.
They tried too hard to be tolerant, so they managed to offend everyone.
In being so tolerant or trying to, you became intolerant by offending, again, all these other people. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and finally, Linkin Park.
Oh, yeah, okay. Talk to us about that.
That was the first episode we did. That's why I think it's already a highlight for us. But
for us, for the world, interesting. But yeah.
So think about it. Linkin Park used to be one of the most popular band of our generation, and they came up with a banger. They came up with a loud bang.
Are you going to play it again on the video? Are we going to have to do that?
Absolutely.
Oh, great. Okay.
Let's put another song.
I should have expected that.
Let's put another song, of course.
All right.
But the way I see it, like, first, then look what happened in the region where we are. We saw the loud concerts of the Eminem then we saw the music festival in Saudi Arabia, where they invited all the major bands, including Linkin Park, including Eminem, including all the voices of the generation. Let me put it this way. And also after Linkin Park, we saw the number of the bands again from that time announcing the new world tours, announcing new albums. So they kind of, I think this was the response to the request of the generation, and also they started this avalanche of the resurrection of the bands. So we will see it. That's why I think this is the major cultural event. And if you can see at how their album is performing, it's phenomenal.
This is what you asked for. Heavy is the crowd, fire in the sunrise.
So, okay. So that Linkin Park reunifying is a globally, if you say so.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced, obviously. This isn't meant to be a debate episode, but if you say so.
We still have the culture clash, so
that's true.
It's definitely you're definitely not there. But if you look at the charts, and I think we will just let's check when they announce the biggest music events of the year. Let's check, and I'm sure that Linkin Park will be one of the top 3.
Okay.
I think it will be right below the Taylor Swift success.
Okay, so that makes it a top 5 globally significant event. That's okay.
Absolutely.
This was your list,
Absolutely.
And you have a right to choose it.
Absolutely.
Fair enough.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, shall we move on to risks?
I think I need to make you listen the whole album, and you will understand.
Yeah, right. Okay. If you say so, I'll think about it when there's some free time. I'll give them a listen. But yeah, okay. Top 5 global event, if you say so.
Let's go to the risks.
Let's go to risks. So fair enough, Vlad. You're telling us about Linkin Park and how much you love the band. We all know that. Yeah, right. So that's the, I think, again, lighthearted end to the top 5 events. I'm going to go back to, again, a bit of the pessimism. So I want to talk about the risks in 2025, what I'm identifying as top risks to the world. Obviously, we keep going back to your country and obviously the thing that's happening, but I think Russia-Ukraine escalation is my number 1 risk, actually, as we look ahead to next year. And the reasons for that are a few. So what we're seeing is that, and again, your president just spoke, I think it was for 4 or 5 hours, as he does every year, right before Christmas. And he gives his rundown on the year in review and everything else. And he confirmed that his goals for the what they call the special military operation, right, the conflict, is the same as it was on day 1. No backing down, no NATO for Ukraine, demilitarization of Ukraine, and now obviously annexing the 4 provinces that they don't fully control yet either. So Russia's not changing its tone whatsoever. What we've seen from Ukraine is, for the first time very recently, particularly after Trump's election, they might be willing to negotiate on territory, but not around NATO and these other things. So my concern is, given what we just talked about with all the escalation that we've seen in 2024, particularly now the West is considering the UK and France maybe deploying troops, we're running out of room on the ladder of escalation, which is a concerning situation. So again, are we going to see more North Korean troops deployed, to Russia? That could obviously be important. What is China going to be doing about all of this? Are we going to see, and these are some of the things I want to look out for, are we going to see a Trump and Putin summit? This is something that they've discussed. That could be a potential for a breakthrough, potential for peace. It could also go poorly, in which case, what are we going to see after that? Trump and Ukraine aid, is he going to not give aid? In which case, that could either be de-escalatory or escalatory, depending on what happens. Do the Europeans then deploy troops? Do they step up the funding? Or does Trump increase funding, which again puts more pressure on the conflict itself? We just don't know what's going to happen. Again, we talked about, is the UK and France going to deploy troops? That would obviously be a huge escalation, huge change. North Korean involvement we discussed, and again, what's China going to do in all of this as we enter next year? So again, I see that the war is almost reaching some sort of crescendo where there's not much more escalation that can take place, which makes me worried it's going to get worse before it gets better. So I would identify that as my number one risk for next year.
Totally
Any
agree
initial
with you.
thoughts?
Totally agree with you. This is also one of the risks that I identified. And I agree with you on all these reasons because, first of all, this is the conflict in the heart of Europe. So many parties are involved. And the shape of the conflict today is very different from it was 2 years ago or even in the beginning of 2024. So yeah, the stakes are higher. And at the same time, I can see the change of, the rhetoric, because previously all the heads of the states, they refused to negotiate and communicate with the Russian president at all, and now we can see that they just met with the prime minister of Slovakia. There was a conversation with German chancellor. I know all these countries, they also have their own agenda and they try to get their points. Like obviously Germany tries to get the points for their like the chancellor tries to get the points for his internal popularity or whatever, but anyway, there are some changes, and I anticipate there will be more changes in the conflict in 2025. And yeah, they can be both for better or for worse.
Yeah, and I think we're just running out of room in terms of where this goes because, again, this year Ukraine lowered its conscription age from 27 to 25. That's still not really stemming the bleeding on the front line from Ukraine's perspective. They continue to lose ground at a quicker pace. So they're stuck between political options. Do you then lower the conscription age to 18? To what extent are you going to continue to fight this conflict, which is obviously really detrimental to both sides? Casualty figures are over 100,000 on both sides, the most deadly conflict we've seen in a long time. From a conventional war perspective, possibly since World War II, at least in Europe. Obviously, there's been others, but what does Russia do? Do they, mobilize? Do they do anything like that? We just don't know what's going to happen. And I think, again, you're just running out of additional options. So it just gets a bit more concerning as to where this all goes. So yeah, let's see. My number two risk, again, very similar to, it's almost like a rehash of what's happened in 2024, conflict with Iran. So again, the reason I bring that up is pretty much highlighting what we already discussed from the 2024 perspective, which is the fall of Syria obviously has dramatically weakened Iran in the region, which also served in many ways as their protective deterrent, so to speak. So in their conflict with Israel over time, they've always said, well, we can always deploy our allies to more directly affect you, which would obviously be in Lebanon and others. Now that that's essentially been neutralized, what I've been reading is that recently both the U.S. and Israel has come out and said that they would both consider preemptive strikes. Both of them have said in the past couple of days, preemptive strikes on Iran are on the table in order to do something about their nuclear program. So again, is this a negotiating tactic? Possibly. But again, I think the one thing with Trump and the one thing we're now going to see in 2025, the middle ground is the least likely outcome. Either we're going to get a deal or we're going to get escalation. So again, status quo, I think, is the only thing that's going to change. So again, that would be important. Obviously, implications for oil, for the economy. It's a huge country. So I think that's a huge risk that I see is what's going to happen there. Hopefully it ends with a deal. But I think the risk of conflict is higher in 2025, direct conflict, than it was in 2024. So we'll see on that. And then finally, my third risk is, again, slightly different, but the economy. So on the economy, again, a lot of people haven't been talking too much about economic risk probably over the past year. Economy's been growing, inflation's been coming down, all of that. But I want to highlight to the audience something that the central banks of the world call something that's the long and variable lag. Have you heard of this term?
No.
So essentially, right, you raise interest rates and then you see what happens. And what we typically see is that it takes years for the impact of those interest rate increases to have a real effect in the economy. So why I bring this up, in 2004, the Fed began hiking interest rates and we had a major recession in 2008, end of 2007. That's what I mean by long and variable lags. It took about 3 or 4 years before the impact really bled through the economy. Before that, it was 1998. Yeah, were you going to say something?
I wonder, I might be wrong, but I think the reason for the 2007 crisis was not the high interest rate, but on the contrary, the cheap loans.
So, right. So mixed story, right? So it's the the lowering of the interest rates artificially beforehand, which is what was done under Alan Greenspan after the dot-com bubble, which then reignited what was then a huge bubble, right? Because when you drop interest rates too low, you then incentivize what's called quote unquote malinvestment.
Okay, I see. So you mean it's like a pendulum?
Yeah, and then what happens is you lowered it too much. Everybody's making these risky loans. Everybody thinks they can afford everything. They take on all this debt, and then you jack up interest rates again, and now you got to pay for it. So that actually leads me to the previous time, 1998, the Fed, the U.S. Federal Reserve, started hiking interest rates. 2000, major recession, the dot-com bust. Yeah. So I think we're now entering that time where it's been about what, 3 years since we started raising interest rates. That's where things get a little bit concerning. Let's not forget in 2022, everybody was predicting 100% chance of recession. That's what all the recession indicators said. It didn't happen. And now we're seeing that the latest thing I read as of today, the latest recession gauges say a 0% chance of recession. I actually think that's a concerning thing. When everybody's on one side, typically the risk of the other thing happening is high. So again, we've got inflation that's still above 2%. It's around 3%, which is up from what the lowest was over the summer this year. So we're now ticking back up in the wrong direction, which means the U.S. is less likely to lower interest rates. That's bad for the rest of the world. The dollar is going to be stronger. It obviously keeps rates a bit higher. Trump's policies obviously could move in any direction on this. There's a huge amount of uncertainty with him coming in. So again, if a trade war breaks out between the U.S. and any of its top 4 trading partners, I mean, that alone could cause a recession. So regardless of all the other stuff we've talked about, if he's able to pump a bunch more oil and gas into the economy by deregulating and all that, that's really positive. We got no clue what's going to happen next year. But the one thing, again, I want to reiterate is in 2022, when everybody said recession gauge 100%, what happened? No recession. Now I read as of today, 0% chance of recession next year. I'm calling, I'm not going to say the word, but I'm calling nonsense on that. I think the stock market's going to be down next year. I think it's going to be down significantly. I think you could even see some sort of crash down by 25+%. Because again, this whole dynamic doesn't look good. It just doesn't look good. So again, that's a risk factor. Doesn't have to go that way, but again, that's my third risk, and I think we've got three major risk factors.
Michael, economic conspiracy theories.
You know, and I was going to say, and you've been calling me that for a while now, and for my friends and everything, they've heard me talk about the risks of the economy now since 2022. There has been no recession, so I probably do sound like a broken record, but I want to go on record as saying I think we're going to get some sort of stock market crash, severe correction next year. I also want to point out for the audience, we'll share some of the graphs. The stock market on a relative basis is way above historical margins from a PE ratio perspective, from a forward earnings multiple perspective. Again, I don't know how deep into economics or finance you are, but it's well above historical norms, significantly. And what we typically see when that happens is you need to come back down to earth. So again, a forward earnings multiple of the S&P 500 of 25 when the historical average is 15, that's not good.
I think majority of indexes are at all-time high now.
All-time highs, exactly. And the U.S. in particular has a higher multiple than everybody else. So I think all these things are major risk factors. So again, I'm going on record. I think stock market is down significantly next year. Call it a crash, call it a severe correction. And that's one of my, again, risks is going to be the economy. Okay. So let's see.
Okay. I will add only... Honestly, I will add only one to yours because, again, we have the overlap. So what I can see, I agree with you on the war conflicts that will continue to evolve, and probably we will see more countries to be involved in this directly or indirectly. But what I also think is, again, with all the far-right movements and with the rise of the nationalism in the countries, we will see that the more countries will look internally in their internal affairs, especially the major ones: Germany, the United States, maybe even Russia, outside of the conflicts. But then, what I think is when the majors look internally, they leave the space for the area of interest to be open. So if the US will switch their focus from the Middle East to their internal affairs, or from the Latin America to their internal affairs, then you will leave the vacuum on these areas, and we might see more like social unrest and social unrise in these areas. That's the risk that I can see. I can see this happening somewhere in the Middle East, in Africa, or in Latin America.
Totally agree. I think you're already seeing a bit of that in Latin America in particular. Yeah, I think that's a great point. So
yeah, less in Middle East. I think they have they had this share already, but yeah, I think we can see something in Latin America and in Africa.
Yeah, absolutely, totally agree. Excellent. Last topic. Let's talk a bit about Christmas.
Yeah, let's cheer.
Now we're going for full holiday mode. Vlad, you're Russian, obviously. We talk about it every episode. Tell us about, how do you guys celebrate? Do you guys even celebrate? Obviously you do. It's a Christian country, but talk to me about what the Christmas celebration is in Russia.
Yeah, so this is interesting because obviously the winter, I think this is the common narrative. The winter is a big thing in Russia, right? Like half of the year
it's meant to be really cold.
Practically,
I've heard.
Yeah. Practically we have the winter, but it's not exactly like that. But anyway, yeah, winter is a big thing, and we don't celebrate so-called Christmas holidays. We do have the Orthodox Christmas, which is on 6th to 7th January, but
it's always on that date,
yes,
which is
always
2 weeks after.
It's always on that day.
Our Christmas,
yeah, it's always on that day. But the thing is, the most important holiday is the New Year. It's not the Christmas. So the way Russians start to celebrate is, we have the New Year holidays from the 31st of December till somewhere of 9th or 10th of January. So basically the whole country had a 10-day break, which is perfect. Everybody's happy about it. And this is a very family event, and everybody's anticipating this in the end of the year. So practically the whole December is in the anticipation of the New Year. And this is where it all starts. So the whole country has the 10 days break, which is the major celebration. And I think, if I remember even my childhood memories, for me the New Year has always been bigger than my own birthday, for example, because everybody's home, my parents are home, friends are home, everybody has the vacation, so everybody's chilling. So yeah, in Russia, they start celebrating from the 31st till the 10th, and somewhere in the middle you have the Orthodox Christmas as well, which is the big deal for those who are who are into the religion. But I would honestly say that for majority of the population, Christmas is very blended in the overall New Year holidays.
Question for you on that. Is that a result of the Soviet legacy when it was state atheism that downplayed religious holidays? Or has that been the case for, obviously longer than your lifetime, maybe even longer than your parents' lifetime, but do you know if that's something that the Soviets changed, or has it always been that way as far as you know?
That is a great question, because if you look at the Russian history, the New Year has not always been there. Before Peter the Great, the New Year started on the 1st of September,
and the old calendar,
and they didn't have the Christmas tree. So Peter the Great, he brought the Christmas tree tradition, and he made the 1st of January as the beginning of the New Year. And then I think, I tend to agree with you that this New Year celebration is more of the Soviet legacy, and it's a very family event. And it has a lot of specific traditions. There should be specific meals on the table, and you heard about Russian salad, I assume. You know how it looks, this.
I know
white thing.
I know Uzbek salad when I was in Uzbekistan. I don't know if that's the same as Russian salad.
I don't know what Uzbek salad is.
It's
honestly
really just a salad, but
no. So there's a specific salad. In Russia they call it winter salad or olivier, or outside Russia it's known as Russian salad, the white thing. Then we have something called herring under the fur coat. Another type of salad, we can show it over here. It's definitely should be on the table. And then typically the way you look at the New Year table is like this. It should be very rich, full of food, and in order to make sure that the upcoming year will be rich and prosperous and all of this. And then so we have all these meals, and one of them like must have is the like small sandwiches with the caviar.
Oh, caviar,
with the
of course.
black or red caviar.
Ikra,
yes,
right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and this is like these meals, they are very typical for all the families, and that's why like in the West you have the Big Mac index, but in Russia we also have the New Year table index, we can call it this way, like the basket of the goods that you need to purchase for the new year. And a lot of analysts, they measure how it changes. And for example, in the recent year, in 2024, year-over-year increase was up to 26 or 28%, depends on the region. So this is the very good inflation market, by the way. Like, even though the official inflation is somewhere between 7 and 9%, here is your real life inflation, 26 to 28%. So yeah, these things they are important. And then of course, like every family, they have their own tradition. And again, all country has their another minor tradition. In the New Year's Eve is where right 11:55, 5 minutes before midnight, we have the I don't know how to say, like the speech of the president. It started again in the Soviet Union, where they addressed the nation, saying that this year was very tough, and the next one will be tough as well.
Is that always what they say?
Yeah, every time. I think we can find the selection where Putin said like this year was very tough. This year was very tough. I think like out of the 25 years as like in power, he mentioned this like 20 plus times.
It's always a hard year in Russia.
Well, yeah, of course. You know, like the happiness through misery.
I was going to say I've been many times. I enjoy it, but anyways, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. What about your traditions?
I'll go through them very quickly. I mean, when I was living in the U.S., it would just be a family event. So when my grandmothers were alive, we'd go up to where they were staying, stay with one on Christmas Eve, when one side of my family was more focused on Christmas Eve, where again, in the West, some folks celebrate the 24th being Christmas Eve more than the 25th, others more the 25th. So we would do that on the 24th, then go see the other grandma on the 25th. We would typically have fish from my Norwegian side of the family. So I don't know if that's a Norwegian tradition, but my grandmother, who was Norwegian, would make fish, things like that. A bunch of different fish, salmon, cod, all that. It was always good. And then I would go see the Puerto Rican grandmother the next day, and she would be making rice and beans, so something completely different. But yeah, it was always like that. So I don't even think in the U.S. you have a particular tradition, 100%, anything like that. I think it's really family dependent. Some will emphasize the Christmas Eve 24th. Some emphasize Christmas Day. Some eat turkey. Some will have a baked chicken. But I don't think we have the same level of traditions. For example, in Europe, where some countries have very specific, or even in Latin America, a set meal or things that they would usually have. So I think, again, we're a bit of a melting pot in America, right? So everybody's bringing traditions from other places. So that's how I would describe it.
Are there any particular traditions in your family how you celebrate New Year's?
No, I just told you. I think that was when my two grandmothers were alive. I think now we're all living, apart from each other. So maybe have a phone call and connect. But besides that, I don't think so. I think, it's a family day. So hang out with family and, or in my case, speak to family. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
And you don't have the long break, do you?
In the US?
Yeah.
You usually get the rest of the week. Not even the rest of the week, to be honest. You might get a couple of days. In school, you always got the full time off. It was winter break, maybe a week or two. In the US, you might get 24 half day or maybe full day 24, 25, but then you're back to work on the 26th.
Oh.
And then you don't have off until New Year's Day. So again, the US doesn't like to give much holiday or leave or anything like that. So it's something like that.
Okay.
Thanks everybody for tuning in to another episode of the Culture Clash podcast. If you like our content, subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Instagram, and we wish you and your families a very happy holidays.